Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to the wild Vaughn Manor. And today we'll be looking back on June on the Range. June on the Range, which was a month devoted to reading Western fiction. When I came up with the idea for June on the Range, I thought I'd be all alone on the range, but no. It turns out other people were interested in reading Western fiction, a genre that used to be huge. It's hard to imagine now just how big this genre was and how many people read Westerns and how many Westerns were printed. I mean, tons and tons and tons of Westerns were printed. And now that genre has faded into obscurity. Now it is but a shadow of what it used to be. And very few Westerns in the traditional model are written nowadays. The American West, of course, will show up in fiction, but not in quite the same way. It's not quite the same as it used to be. That's for sure. I grew up reading a lot of Westerns because there were so many Westerns lying around, and because probably it was so huge in film and on television as well when I was growing up. Westerns were on TV always, which made me more interested in reading Westerns when I was growing up. Also, my grandfather was a huge Louis L'Amour fan, like a lot of people's grandfathers were. And so I read a bunch of his books. But I had not read a Western in a while. And so I was feeling like I wanted to revisit the Western, and so I came up with the idea of June on the Range as kind of a gag. I didn't think anyone would be interested in joining me, like I said. But yes, I actually got a whole gang of co-hosts. I'll link them down below, because even though the event is over, these are channels you should definitely check out if you're not already watching them. Great, great booktube channels, every one of them. So I should probably talk about what I read during June on the Range. I've talked about quite a bit of this already, but I'll go through it really quickly. And then the last couple books that I'm going to be talking about, I haven't talked about before. Unfortunately, and it would figure that it would be in the month when I was doing my first event. I was busier in June than I've been in, well, at least since the beginning of the pandemic. I was pretty busy then too, but I didn't have a booktube channel. And it didn't matter how much I read. But I was busier last month than I had been in a long, long time. I can't remember being so busy since then, at least. Because in the city where I work, things are coming back to life a little bit. And there were events that are happening again. Juneteenth was a big event last month. And when stuff like that happens, I'm busier. And I was very busy. And some other things happened that made me very busy as well. So I had just a little bit of reading time. And I even lost some of my weekends where I usually catch up. So there were days when I only had I had 15 or 20 minutes to film a video. And maybe that night I had maybe a half hour to read before I passed out. It was that kind of month, which is unfortunate. So needless to say, I didn't read nearly as much as I wanted to. And a lot of my co-hosts actually read and made more videos than I did as far as June on the Range is concerned. But let's just go over it real quick. I've got Zane Grey, which was interesting. This was actually a good book. This is Shadow on the Trail. It's the one Zane Grey I was able to read this month. And it was a reminder of how times have changed in a lot of ways. This is a very dramatic book, really melodramatic. The action and the plot were good. Unfortunately, there were some oddly placed racial slurs that did not have to be in here at all, and yet were. I guess because that kind of thing was just so common that, it pops up in Zane Grey books a lot. So there was that, but it was a good read, I have to say. It was a good book. I followed that up with Louis L'Amour. I read 2 Louis L'Amour books, Crossfire Trail and Fallon. Didn't have to worry about any racial slurs in these books. It reminded me just what an entertaining author Louis L'Amour is. He just has such a natural feel for action and plot. He comes from the pulp magazines, Louis L'Amour, and transitioned perfectly into paperback originals. And he just pumped these books out like so many of his contemporary Western writers. He just wrote a ton. Usually his books were really good. They were always entertaining. He had a good grasp of character. And these were 2 really, really good books. Crossfire Trail, one of his earlier books. Fallon, a book where he has a shifty gambler for a hero who ends up being the hero of the book. Really entertaining one. I highly recommend Fallon. But both of these books were really good. I was hoping to read some more Louis L'Amour than I did. I probably won't wait a year to read more Louis L'Amour, but definitely when I do June on the Range next year, and I'm hoping YouTube is still around next year, and I'm still around next year. If those 2 things still exist, then definitely I will be doing more Louis L'Amour for June on the Range next year. So that was fun. I enjoyed those books an awful lot. I'd been wanting to read this book for a long time, Buckskin Man by Wayne D. Overholser. Wayne D. Overholser is one of my favorite Western writers. He's almost always entertaining. He also has a good grasp of character, the way Louis L'Amour does. Maybe even a little more so at times. His plots, very often they're kind of very typical Western plots, but he always does a lot with them. And the characters are always really interesting, and so they tend to be character-driven books. So, at least the ones that I've read. Buckskin Man by Wayne D. Overholser. That was fun. Then this very strange detective novel, Born to Trouble by Nelson C. Nye. I've always liked Nelson C. Nye. He wrote in a very pulpy style that was left over from the Western pulps. And this was a fun book. I'm not sure it lives up to the cover. The cover's really good. This is a really good cover, but the book was fun. It's basically a mystery novel wrapped up in a Western setting with a Western character as the detective. He just happens to be a kid who just joined the Rangers and is the worst detective ever and gets himself into all kinds of terrible trouble. Born to Trouble. This was fun. This was a fun book. Not the best book I read this month, but it was a lot of fun, Born to Trouble. So I talked about all of those books before. And then I read this book. This is a book by Gene Hackman, famous film star Gene Hackman, who's been in 9 million movies, including Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood, a standout Western film. This is Payback at Morning Peak by Gene Hackman. And I was thinking of doing a video on just this book alone, but I never did. And partially that is because this book, while it is entertaining, and I would say it's a good book, definitely, it's not great. It's good, but not great. There were things about it that they just didn't hit home all the way. There were some odd descriptions. The characters were good, but there was just something about it that I'm not quite sure it lived up to its page count, for one thing. It's not a huge book. This is about 400 pages. It probably could have been a book about this long, because it had a plot very reminiscent of the old paperback westerns, in that it was a story of revenge. There's this kid who's a 17-year-old kid who is out hunting in the hills when his family are murdered, raped and murdered, unfortunately, some members of his family, by this vicious gang. And he comes back and he's able to kill a few of them. And then he rides the vengeance trail to get justice. There is a good deal more violence in this than you would probably see in some of the older paperbacks, and that a good deal more graphic violence, graphic sexual violence, that kind of thing. This kid who's 17 years old and presumably has never been in a fight seriously before ends up being kind of like Rambo in the beginning of this book. He should be dead. This kid should have been killed like right away. But no, like I said, he's just naturally like Rambo with his .22 rifle. There are some things that stretch credibility in this book, but it is an entertaining book. I don't want it to make it sound like it's bad, because it's not. It does have a feel of a traditional Western. I like that about it. It just wasn't great, at least not to me. And it seemed like even at 400 pages, it was a bit longer than it needed to be. So yeah, that was Payback at Morning Peak. I'm glad I read it. It was an interesting read. And as far as I know, this was the only Western that Gene Hackman wrote. He did write some other books before this one with a co-writer. I believe this might have been his first novel that he wrote on his own, which can explain, I suppose, some of the oddness in the structure and description of the book. And I think he wrote like a thriller or something after this. I don't know that he's read or that he's written anything since. But yeah, Payback at Morning Peak. So it was an interesting read. And right now, I didn't finish this in June because it's enormous. This is Lonesome Dove. Now I'm only about, I would say, not quite a quarter of the way through this yet. And this book is really good, just like everybody has said it would be. This is excellent. Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. It is an excellent book. It's told in a really entertaining way. Kind of a breezy, westerny, folksy style with a lot of humor, which is interesting considering how much tragedy is going to be in this book. And I know that because, unfortunately, this book has been spoiled for me, and it had been for a long time. I know the fate of the two main characters in this book, and I have for years, because this book has been around for years. I mean, what do you do when you've got a book that's been around for decades and it's very popular? Sometimes you hear things, and I've heard what happens to the main characters in this book. So I already knew that going in. But unfortunately, Larry McMurtry does something odd in this edition, in that before, he's got a preface here. It's a little 2-page preface, which I naturally read because it's, 2 pages in the front of your book. Naturally, your author is not going to spoil anything major in a 2-page preface, right? He's just going to mention a little of this and a little of that. No, he spoils something major in the story. Like, there's this character who's a really good character in this book, and an important character, and he just tells you what happens to this character and the tragic fate of this character and how this character meets this tragic fate. And it's like, what? It would be better not to have known that, Larry McMurtry, considering I know everything else that happens in this book. It would have been nice not to have been told this particular thing. Why would you do that, Larry? So, yeah, a little 2-page preface, which completely spoils something major. And I was wondering, why did you do that? Why didn't you make this an afterword if you were going to, just talk about this? And maybe Larry McMurtry's just so full of himself that he figures, this book has been out for a while. By the time this edition comes out, obviously you've read it before, and you're just going to read it again because you love it so much. This could be your 4th or 5th time reading it, probably because I'm so great and my book is so great. So, it's no big deal for me to spoil this major thing because you already know it. I didn't know it. I haven't read your great book, Larry McMurtry, until now. So, yeah, so now everything's spoiled. I know everything that happens in this book. But it almost doesn't matter because it really is an entertaining novel. Like I said, I can't give it a final judgment, obviously, when I haven't even read 25% of it yet. Or 20, yeah. But it is good, I can tell you that. Now, is this the best Western novel ever, as it has been advertised by so many people? Probably not. I don't think it will end up being, for me at least, the greatest Western novel ever. But like I said, I'm not done with it yet. We'll see. Maybe it will be. Maybe. And will this thing live up to its length? Does it have to be this gigantic? No, probably not. I've already noticed that it probably doesn't have to be as big as it is, probably to tell the story that it wants to tell, and to tell it well, frankly. But you know, it's all entertaining, so it doesn't matter. It just, I can see that there are going to be a lot of moments where he focuses on characters probably he doesn't really need to focus on, and he'll probably tell the backstory of every single, pig and cow that wander by. But that's okay because it's entertaining. But we'll see. We'll see how I feel about it once I've read the whole thing. I'm really enjoying it so far. So my June on the Range is extended, but extended in a good way because I'm really enjoying Lonesome Dove. And then that'll be it. After Lonesome Dove, I'm probably done with Westerns for a while. And so you won't see me in this outfit again, probably for some time. Probably. I mean, you never know on my channel what I'm going to end up doing, but probably this will be it for Westerns until the next time I do June on the Range. And hopefully all of my fantastic co-hosts will join me again. I'm very thankful to all of my co-hosts for taking such an interest, and for so many other people who watch our videos who have also taken part. I really appreciate that. I appreciate all of you viewers, folks who watch my channel and all of my co-host channels who have taken part in this. That's a very nice thing. Yeah, my channel did something good for a change. Instead of just me coming on here acting like an idiot. Well, I did that too. I'll continue to do that. So yeah, that was June on the Range. It was awesome. I had a great time. And I will see you next time.